What is happening, guys? Kadi Plays here, bringing you another Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel video. And in today's video, we're going to be doing a tier list. Finally, another tier list coming to the channel, this time for the brand new 1-year anniversary celebration that is bringing us Exosister support, Rikka support, and, you know, of course, the deck everyone's talking about, Spright support. So, Spright is coming to the game. All these other decks are getting support. Those are not the only decks getting support. There's some of them, but yeah, guys, like, I mean, this is a great time to do another tier list. We just got a ban list, and I think it's important to talk about the metagame going into this new format that we're going to be in, because things are going to look a lot different than they currently do. Really quickly, I'm going to jump over to Master Duel Meta really quickly. Look at the tier list. This is the current tier list. This is according to Master Duel Meta. These are based on just like tournament topping results. I don't think this is the perfect tier list. Of course, I don't even think, you know, DK and the guys that run this, well, DK runs this, but I don't even know if he would say this is like a perfect tier list, because sometimes tournament results can be a little skewed based on like the format of the tournament and stuff like that. But anyways, this is like a good framework, right? This is a good framework to go off of the current format we're in, but now we're in a new format. Now we got Spright. Now we got all these new things. And what changes? Well, let's talk about it. So as always, we got 5 tiers here. We got tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, Rogue, and UR/SR Dust. If you don't know what that means you should dismantle it. It's not very good. Or you shouldn't have crafted it in the first place. Something to note. This is a tier 1. There's a chance this could be tier 0. But I'm going to say tier 1. I don't know what I just did. I'm going to say tier 1, though. And I'm not going to go out on a limb and say, you know, Spright is tier 0, because we don't know. So I'm just going to use tier 1 through Rogue, then UR/SR Dust, and it might end up being tier 0. I think there's a very good chance it could, but only time will tell. So without further ado, let's jump right on into the video. Starting off with ABC. So this is ABC Therion. I'm going to put this at tier 3. I think this deck can compete with pretty much anything in the game if it goes first. If it goes first, this deck can establish some absolutely insane boards. The Union Carrier banning of the last ban list does hurt, but that still doesn't change the fact that it's got like a lot of really great, you know, versatile options. And something I've thought about with Ancient Fairy Dragon coming off the ban list is if we could find a way to synchro in this deck, some sort of synchro engine. I don't know if that exists. I'm sure it does. But if we can find a way to access that, we could cycle Union Hanger and Disc Coliseum with Ancient Fairy Dragon and also get a free special summon of one of our, you know, A, B, or C monsters, which could be really strong. So, just some thoughts I had. But right now, I think this is a tier 3 deck. Maybe, you know, top of tier 3, top of Rogue, bottom tier 3, somewhere around that range. But I do think it's better than some of the decks that are going to be on Rogue in this list. Moving on to Adamancipator Sprite. So, this is something that has not been very popular in the TCG or in the OCG, but it is something that, you know, exists. Of course, Adamancipator, you know, let's just look at the Adamancipator cards really quickly. Like, what do we got here? Hey, we got some Synchros, then we got level 2 Researcher, level 2 Seeker. There's some synergy here, right? I mean, it's not perfect synergy because Gigantic Sprite locks you into level 2 monsters, so does Starter. So you can't always like fully extend combos like Adamancipator normally does, but it's a different way of playing Adamancipator that is very interesting. I don't know the combos in the deck list like perfectly to be able to give you like a full explanation. Excuse me about that. Like, full explanation of how this deck is going to function if it's going to be played. But I do think it's something people are going to experiment with in Master Duel, because Block Dragon is legal and that's something to consider. So right now I'm going to put this at tier 3. I would also put Pure Adamancipator at tier 3. I think it's very strong, but I think it loses a lot with Block Dragon, of course. And I think having Spright in the game, which has the ability to search Max C, makes a deck like this just slightly worse. Which it probably was still tier 3 anyways. But I will say it's better than ABC, I think, overall. Adventure Phantom Knights. I think this is a really strong deck. Is it tier 2? I don't know. Yeah, this is really tough. Adventure Phantom Knights, this deck can definitely be tier 2. We still have... Yeah, you know what? I'm going to say tier 2. I don't see a reason why this deck is not tier 2 in the current format. It's not being played, like, virtually at all. But when it does get played, it has great success, you know, in tournaments. Like, if we look at tournaments here, look at Phantom Knights, You know, Phantom Knights, like, they top a lot. Well, that doesn't make any sense. Why is it searching Scareclaw and stuff like that? Okay, anyways, whatever it's doing this. You know, we see Phantom Knights here, like, we see first place, top 4, first place, second place, top 16, first place. No, this is Virtual World. Okay, sorry about that. But, you know, we see a lot. Oh, that's because they're playing Breaksword. But you see, like, when this deck enters tournaments, it does perform very, very well. So I think that's still going to carry over to the new format. And I just think the reason this deck is not tier 2 currently, or top tier currently, is just because people don't play it. You know, people are playing other stuff. It does lose really hard to Protoss, which is something to note. But you know, it is what it is. Virtual World. I think Virtual World is like the epitome of like a tier 3 deck. Like this deck is, it's got such a great ceiling, but also it has so many like negative aspects to it. You know, it's very bricky. It's got a lot of, it doesn't have that many nerfs anymore. All the little guys got unnerfed. It does still have the VFD nerf. It does have the Avenger nerf, you know, so on and so forth. Pot of Prosperity being nerfed, you know, does definitely hurt a deck like this. But, you know, overall, I think it's just a solid tier 3 deck. You know, really good playing into Floodgates, which are semi-prevalent right now, but not super prevalent. Especially it's going to be even less so with the Spright stuff coming out, I think. But only time will tell, of course. Adagnister, Mathmech Adagnister. I think this is definitely a tier 2 deck. It's very, very solid. The ability to make an arrival, plus also back it up with, you know, Mathmech support, potentially Super Factorial if you want to play that, it's very, very strong. You don't need to play Super Factorial either. You know, just the Mathmech stuff, you know, gives you that extra bit of extension the deck really needed. You know, Heat Soul's also a great addition, which you know, we've talked about that in a previous tier list, like when Heat Soul came out. But this is just like a very well-rounded deck currently, and it's got a lot of great applications in the current format. I don't know how good Spright is against it. I would need to think about it a little bit more. But it doesn't seem like Spright would have a good way of clearing Arrival. If I'm not mistaken, it wouldn't. Look at some of the Spright stuff. How does Spright out this? I know there are ways to out it, of course. But just with the engine, I don't know. You know, so it's something to think about. Maybe Adagnister is something that, you know, is going to continue to be very, very strong as this format progresses. Branded Despia. I previously would have put this at tier 1. In the current format, I would put it at tier 1. But with Spright coming out, I'm going to put this at tier 2. I know the tier list over here is not really giving Branded Despia like all that credit. It's putting it at tier 3. I think that's because people are just not playing it. I think it's easily one of the best 3 decks in the current format. Mathmech, Sword Soul, and Branded Despia are clearly the 3 best decks in the game right now. It's just not being played very much, as opposed to those other 2, which are. So I don't really understand why, but I mean, it's a fantastic deck. I do think it gets slightly worse with, you know, the Spright stuff coming out, just because Spright is just really, really good. So I think it just lowers itself down a little bit on the tier list. But, you know, I don't think it's like head and shoulders above this other stuff to where it needs to be like in a tier above these. I think Adagnister and Phantom Knights are sort of on the same level as Branded Despia, but slightly worse, but still in that tier 2 range. This is Eldlich. This can be whatever Eldlich you want. Insert Eldlich.deck. I put Branded on here because I think you probably should be playing Branded Fusion, even if you're playing Floodgates, you know. It's still like really, really strong. Eldlich is unplayable. You know, I mean, this deck's not playable with Runick in the game. You know, whether you're playing Spright Runick or a different kind of like Floodgate Runick, like whatever it is, this deck becomes unplayable because it picks apart your engine. It has so much diverse back row removal that it's just really hard for a deck like Eldlich to really get going. So it's not really unfortunate either, to be honest with you. Except Eldlich is like really cool when it doesn't play Floodgates, but you know, sad. Thunder Dragon, again, this is the same thing. It's like whatever Thunder Dragon version you're playing with. I'm putting Branded on here because I think it's just like the best version. I mean, I don't know, like tier 3 maybe, bottom of tier 3, like maybe it's around here with, you know, Virtual World. It's really hard to rank a deck like this because it doesn't really see any success in tournaments, but when I play it, I think it's really solid. I mean, I think it has the ability to play Shifter, which is nice. It has the ability to play Colossus, which is absolutely insane against so many decks in the current format. Going first, this deck is very, very strong. Going second, it can struggle because it doesn't have the board breaking potential of a pure Branded Despia version, but it still has a lot of applications. You know, it also depends on how you build it. You can build it more Branded heavy, more Despia heavy, and it can kind of just be a supplementary engine. Like instead of the patchwork stuff, you can play the Thunder Dragon stuff, and that's very interesting. I don't think that's the best way to do it, but I think it's interesting. But you know, there's a lot of different ways you can go about something like this. But all in all, I think all the different versions fall in this tier 3 category. Then we got Triple D, DDD. This deck just continues to get worse and worse as time goes on because every other deck just gets better, and this deck doesn't. So if you're not moving forwards, you're moving backwards. You know, just basic. This deck's just not very good. I mean, it's a fine deck, but it doesn't have enough going second, I don't think, to be able to compete. And I guess if Nibiru like loses popularity because of Spright, which could happen, I don't think it will, but I think it could happen. This deck could start to see more play. Also, if hand traps start to flood out of the meta because Spright, board breakers are very good against Spright, you could see a deck like this coming back. Same thing with like Adamancipator. But I think as soon as that happens, people will just be like, oh yeah, play hand traps again because they're good against Spright, and well, they're fine against Spright. They're not good against Spright, but they're fine against Spright, and they're also like really good against all these other combo decks, you know. So it just goes back to DDD sucking, which is really unfortunate because this deck is super cool. It's very, honestly, if you don't know how to play against Triple D, you're probably going to lose to it because it's very difficult to interact with this deck. I personally have troubles interacting with it, and I, play this game probably too much, for being honest. But DDD overall, I think it's a rogue deck. I think it's got nowhere to go but down in the current state of things, sadly. Dinomorphia, this is tough. I think Dinomorphia is probably the third best trap deck in the game right now. I think, Floodgate deck in the game right now. Behind Runick, like Runick Stun, and behind Labyrinth. Because Dinomorphia, it does, I feel like what Labyrinth does, but it does it by paying life points. And it's a cool little niche, but you just make yourself so susceptible to just dying or time or anything. So, I don't know. It's difficult to rank a deck like this. And also, in a game like this, if you're not playing in a tournament, the time rules don't really apply. But if you are playing in a tournament and you go to time because you're freaking stalling with all your floodgates, you're going to lose because you're at 500 life points or whatever it is, right? So, also, how does this card is pretty good, I think. So, Psychic and Punisher. If you don't know what this card does, basically, while your life points are equal to or lower than your opponents, this single something. Okay, so no, it's if your life points are equal to or lower than your opponents. So this is not good against Dinomorphia, so completely scratch that thought that I potentially just had there. Moving on to Dinos. No, I'm just kidding. Dinomorphia, I think it's got a lot of flaws as an archetype, but it's a very cool archetype. But also it's a Floodgate archetype, so it's really not that cool. Pure Dinos, OG Dinos. I think this deck might be honestly, this deck might be really good in the current format. Honestly, because Misk, Spright is susceptible to board breakers. And, Dino's, just board breaker deck, really. So, this deck might be insane in the current format. And Misk is obviously insane. It can beat anything. It can literally it can beat anything. This deck can just beat anything. And that's something that not all decks can do, I feel like. This might be top of tier 3. It might even be tier 2 if people actually played it consistently. But right now I'm going to put it at tier 3 because it doesn't really see a lot of play. It's got 4 or 5 guys that consistently play this deck. And if you only have 4 or 5 people that play it, you're not going to be racking in tournament results like that. So really unfortunate, but I think that's just kind of how it is. Dragon Link, I hate it because you guys know, at least if you watch this channel before, this deck, this is my baby. I love Dragon Link. This is my favorite deck, maybe ever. Probably not ever, but it's one of my favorite decks ever. I think it's so fun to play, and I think it has so much potential and so much versatility, but it's just not very good right now. In the current form, Grass getting hit for tier, tier causing Grass to get hit preemptively, just makes this deck worse because this deck's calling card was the fact that it can play power cards like Pot of Desires, like Talons, like Grass, and it can play through your opponent's hand traps so efficiently because of cards like that. Grass forces you to commit hand traps where you wouldn't normally want to commit hand traps. So does Desires. And then Talons punishes you for committing hand traps in really bad places. Now the deck's got to change because the math on Grass in 60 is not really good, right? Now going down to 40 has its problems too with a deck like this because you play a lot of cards that are searchable that you don't want to draw. And Dragon Link's just in a really weird place right now currently. Also, I mean, it just... Searchable Maxi. Like, it's just so hard for, like, combo decks like this to be good with Searchable Maxi, whereas, like, I don't know. It's just very difficult for me to say that, but at the same time, I'm also saying Ad Ignister and Phantomites are tier 2, but I think it's because they didn't get nerfed like Dragon Link did. But, you know, all this is very flexible in here, I feel like. Especially, like, I would say, like, this here is, like, flexible. But, you know, I think Branded SP is clearly tier 2. And I think these are, like, tiers. I think these are slightly better than tier 3. And I think this is, like, top of tier 3. But, anyways, enough rambling about my dragons. Moving on to Heroes. Heroes got some cool support, right? I wonder if I type in Elemental Hero, it'll pop up the new stuff. Of course it doesn't. I don't know where all the new stuff is. I don't know. There's like 3 pages of hero stuff. I'm not going to look at all that. But Hero's got some like really cool support. I think it's really interesting. Like the instant contact card like is really, really insane. But despite that, I really don't think this deck is going to do very much. I think it still has like mostly the same problems it had before. And that's that it doesn't establish the interruptions, like the protection against like interruptions early enough in its combos. Or like in its combos in general. Unless I'm just missing something that's new that allows you to do that. But I could be sleeping on this, but I really don't think this is going to do much in the current format. I think it can win. You know, Dark Law is an insane card. Plasma's an insane card. Some of the new stuff is absolutely insane. It can just hard make DPE, which is very nice still. But overall, I think Hero's got a lot working against it. Very similar to DTD. But I do think it's better than DTD. Drytron. Yeah, I mean, I think Drytron is pretty much where it's been. You know, this deck doesn't really get better. It doesn't really get worse, to be honest with you. Because it's fine against... I mean, Searchable Maxi hurts everything. So, like, you can't really say that for all this stuff. But, you know, Drytron is just... It's really... It's too nerfed. I mean, like, I say it's too nerfed. Like, it should be nerfed. Because this deck is toxic as hell when it's full power. But, like, Benton should not be what's limited. You know, Herald should just be banned. Like, that's my philosophy, at least. Like, Benton's a cool card. You know, and it lets a deck like this extend very far and make really cool plays. Like, the Floodgates are what should be banned, not the actual extension cards. Same thing with, like, Hulk. Like, why were they banning all the tuners? Just ban Hulk. Like, that solves all the problems. You know, but it's just different philosophy that Konami seems to go off of. Moving on to Exosister. This deck's pretty hyped up right now, but I think this deck is trash. Like, I do not think this deck is good. I think this deck is maybe tier 3, probably Rogue, though. Like, I might be, like... you know, being way too harsh on a deck like this, but I don't think this deck does anything. This deck, like, it's just not good. Like, the best thing about this deck is the fact that it can play Shifter and Necro Valley. Like, okay. Wow, that's wonderful. Good for you. You know, Spright can also play those cards, if it really wants to. Like, and Sprite's just better. This deck is good when tier is prevalent, and... even then, it's not better than Flunder. You know, it's a very strange deck that people just like seem to really like, but I don't think it does anything. And I hope I'm not wrong. I hope I'm not wrong because it's kind of a toxic deck too. But speaking of Flunder, everyone's favorite, I think Flunder's still great. Yeah, I think this is a tier 3 deck. I mean, Barrier Statue's banned, but you know, it still does what it does. You know, Flunder do what it do. You know, it still establishes Impin, it can establish Apex, it can Harpy's Featherstorm you, which is still incredibly toxic, it can Ryza, you know, cycle your, like, you know, stack your deck, so you're not, like, going to play for the next 2 turns. It can also still play a Barrier Statue, you can play the Water Barrier Statue if it plays Small World. It's got a lot going for it, right? And going first, it's still almost as good as it used to be. You know, so I think it's really solid. Sadly, it really hasn't changed. It's not like tier 1 anymore, or tier 2, but I think it's still a top tier deck. Definitely still going to be in the metagame. This is, okay, Invoked Shaddoll Dogmatica or Branded, or whatever you want to say. There's going to be another Shaddoll down here that I talk about because I think these decks are very distinct from each other right now. This deck sucks. Like this deck is just not playable anymore. This is like genuinely like the first like dismantle it. Like what are you doing? Like if you're playing this deck, you should not be playing this deck. But also don't dismantle it because the pieces in this deck are decent just in other things. But just Shaddoll Invoke Dogmatica is completely unplayable right now. It doesn't do anything. Like that's a problem. It doesn't do anything. It's just like it's like Heroes but work. I mean like it's just bad. I don't know what to say. It doesn't do anything. But anyways, don't dismantle these cards. Like I should probably change this just for that. But yeah. Anyways, moving on to Labyrinth, which this card is not even in the game, but I put it as the picture for whatever reason. I think this is the best Floodgate deck besides Runick. So better than Flunder, but worse than Runick. And I think it's tier 3. The reason I think it's tier 3 is because Runick plays, back row removal. The adventure cards that are in the metagame, like adventure is in the metagame, like somewhere in the metagame. Like there's a chance you're gonna play against it. Sword Soul's in the metagame with the Shuda, all that stuff. Like it's got very good ways to out back row and to outgrind this deck. This deck does grind very well. I will say that. It grinds incredibly well, but it loses, very hard to consistent back row removal, and Runick has that. And, a lot of decks have consistent reoccurring back row disruption. So for that reason, I think it's tier 3, but maybe we can see it. And it's also like a trap deck. Like this is not going to do anything going second, really. Usually going second, this deck just folds. But, sometimes it doesn't, right? The next thing is a Libromancer. I think this deck is super cool, but I don't think it's very good. I think it's a rogue deck. I think it's like better, like one of the better rogue decks, honestly. Like people don't really give it enough credit, right? Like, I think it's a solid combo deck. It can establish, some nice interruptions. It can play around Nib, if I'm not mistaken. It can Scythe Lock. It can do a lot of different things. It's pretty cool. But it really needs the, I think it's called the Makenko. Correct me if I'm wrong. The Makenko, it really needs these cards. It really needs the Makenko cards for it to be like really good. And when we get those in like a year, whatever it might be, this deck will be really solid. But until then, I think it's a rogue deck. So this is the first Spright variant, really, other than Adamancipator, like first primarily Spright variant that we're going to talk about. This is Spright Live Twin. I think this deck's tier 1. I think this is one of the best versions of Spright you can play. It does sacrifice the ability to search Max C for more of a well-rounded normal summon monster lineup. So it sacrifices the Dark Beckoning Beast, the Beavers, the Divas, and the Swap Frogs, whatever combination of those you're playing, for the Live Twin cards. But it gives you access to different kind of disruptions. It gives you access to free draws off of the pink Live Twin. It gives you pops off the blue one. And it gives you access to Triple Sunny on your opponent's turn. Not necessarily on your opponent's turn, but you need to commit to Triple Sunny before you go for starter or for gigantic, or go for it on your opponent's turn with Masquerena, if you can even do that. I don't even know if you can do that, actually. Yeah, you can. Okay, so you can technically IP into this, which would not be that bad. But, overall, I don't think it's the best Spright variant, but I think it's a very solid Spright variant that you should definitely look into if you're considering playing the deck, which everyone should be because it's going to be the best deck. I'll be uploading a combo rough, not a rough combo guide, but a combo guide for Spright, just going over some of the basics of the deck. And within that, I will be showing a few different deck lists, primarily the more traditional deck list that we're going to be talking about, Pure Spright, Runick Spright, Live Twin Spright, so on and so forth. So it'll be a nice starting point for anyone who's new to the archetype. But this is going to be our first tier 1 deck because I think it's very, very strong. Then we got Marincess here. I think Marincess is... I think it's probably here, give or take. I mean, maybe better than Drytron, maybe worse than all this stuff. Well, I don't know. It's so hard to rank within these ranks. But I think this is clearly, without a doubt, the worst cyber strategy. I think all the cyber strategies are better than this currently. But yeah, that's my opinion. It does everything the other one. It does everything, in my opinion, Adamancipator does, just slightly worse. And it does not play the Mathmech cards as efficiently. So, yep. Speaking of Mathmechs, everybody's favorite, Circular, and just pure Mathmech. I think this is probably top of tier 2, right? You know, I think it's probably slightly better than Branded Despia right now because it doesn't lose as hard to one hand trap, and it's not as nerfed, right? I mean, Despia's got some slap on the wrist, right? I know it's got opening at 2, Aliber at 2, etc. So it's got a little bit of nerfs there, here and there, and all in all, I think Mathmech is just slightly better than Despia, but these are about on the same power level. But I do think these are a little bit better than these two here. So really, we could be like tier 2.5 is like right here, and these can drop down, but that's getting like really nitpicky. Pendulum Magician, I think this is the same problem as like all these other combo decks. Like it's just combo. Like combo is so hit or miss in a game like this. And it just gets worse with Searchable Maxi, but it's still like, it does what it does, you know. I mean, and it just got buffed in the recent ban list, you know, getting its, what's it called? Not Wisdom Eye, not something Magician, Pendulum Dude. What's its name? Iris Magician. Double Iris Magician. That guy. This thing's unlimited now, which is a nice little buff for the deck, but at the end of the day, it still struggles. Right? You know, it can like recycle Shifter infinitely though. Not infinitely, but for like 3 turns, which is really cool. Next is Pure Punk. So, I think Pure Punk is going to be down here. I don't think Pure Punk's a real deck. Not in its current form. But I think Punk as an engine is a top tier engine. I mean, I think this is a tier 2 level engine. Any deck that can play Punk should play Punk, really. I mean, I think that's like a pretty reasonable thing to say. And all these different combo decks, like they can just throw Punk in there and it just makes them better, right? Dragon Link, it might not make it better because you're playing 60 cards in D-Link, but having the ability to mill 9 cards is absolutely insane. For those of you who don't know, like E-Telly is mill 9. Like it's absolutely ridiculous. So you go E-Telly for Z-Almond effect, pay 600, search the Foxy Tune. I'll go over this really quickly. So you go E-Telly, bring out Z-Almond effect, pay 600 life points, add a Punk. That's add Foxy Tune. Okay, then you Foxy Tune effect, discard itself and something else to summon Deer Note from the deck. Synchro, level 3 plus level 5, into Chaos Ruler. Pega Ruler, right? Mill 5. Deer Note's effect's going to trigger when it's sent to the graveyard. You can target a Pumpkin monster in your graveyard, except a level 5 monster, special summon it. And then what you do is you bring back Foxy Tune, then overlay the Foxy Tune and the Chaos Ruler for Zombie Vampire. Right? You could also link off the Chaos Ruler if you have other extenders, and then bring it back, and then overlay into Zombie Vampire with the Foxy Tune to get multiple uses out of your revive of the Chaos Ruler. And you just mill 4 more with the Chaos Ruler. And you get a free body off this. Absolutely insane. Like, it's a crazy little combo. And that is so good for so many decks. Like, Phantom Knight should be playing it. Dragon Link should play it if you're not playing 60. I mean, 60, you probably still can play it, but it's a little bit rough. I don't know what other decks will be playing it, to be honest with you. I'll have to do some more theory. ABC might play it. I don't know. I mean, that might be a little risky, but, you know, Eldlich should play it. Like so many decks should play this. Like, it's so good. Liebermanzer should play it. It's insane. But that being said, the pure Punk strategy doesn't end on anything. It doesn't end on enough. It ends on a searchable Ghost Ogre. Not really enough. I mean, it can end on some other stuff too, right? Of course it can. But it doesn't end on enough by itself. It really needs other engines and other, like, you know, primary decks to make consistent, powerful inboards with it. But, of course, only time will tell. This will get better when Tier comes out, because Tier Punk is a real thing, and it's something we all need to be scared of, because Chaos Ruler and a Zombie Vampire and Tier Elements is absolutely disgusting, but we don't have Tier Elements right now. So, right now, Punk is an engine, top tier, very strong. Punk is a pure deck, rogue. Pure Spright. I think this is better than Live Twin Spright because it's got searchable Max C. Swap Frog is still insane, even though you can't go for Toad. You can still establish the searchable Max C. You can still go for all these different things. The Dark Beckoning Beast package is very, very strong. It has the ability to play around Ghost Ogre. It plays around hand traps very, very well. Plays into hand traps well, I should say. And overall, I think it's just one of the best versions of the deck. I don't know if it's the best version of the deck. I'm very conflicted on this, but I think it's slightly better than the Live Twin version. But if you do want to play the Live Twin version, it is right there with this. It's like right below this, in my opinion. Rikka Sunavalon. I think Rikka Sunavalon is going to be very clearly a tier 2 deck. And just before I actually talk about this, I want to make sure this is actually coming out. I probably should have done this beforehand. But I'm like 99% sure like Rikka's actually coming out. Yeah, Rikka Con-Con's here. Wanted to make sure like all of the Rikka support was coming out. Like we got Rikka Princess, Rikka Con-Con, all that stuff's coming out. And this deck is absolutely tier 2. This is going to be one of the best decks in the game. I think it's going to be right there with Sword Soul, Despia, Mathmech as like that top of tier 2 type of deck. It's insane, guys. Going first, this deck is absolutely cracked. Like you don't lose when you go first with this deck. Like you tribute literally all of your opponent's cards. Like it's insane. Like Con-Con, this is one of the most broken cards like ever. For those of you who don't know, like this is a field spell card. If you control a Rikka monster, you can set, Rikka spell trap directly from your deck. It's an interruption right there. You also can't special for the rest of the turn except plant monsters, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter. The whole deck's plants. You can also play Rivalry, which is kind of insane. Once per turn, if you attribute a plant monster, activate a Rikka card or effect, you contribute one face-up monster your opponent controls, even though you don't control it. So you can pair this with like other Rikka traps that are also interruptions, that also tribute your opponent's monsters, and just like tribute your opponent's field to negate more of their stuff. It's so good. Yeah, this deck, it's always slept on, but it's going to be one of the best decks in the game, and you're going to need to know how to play against it. Because if you don't know how to play against it, you are screwed. You are definitely screwed. But anyways, enough rambling about that. Moving on to Runick Stun. I think Runick Stun is going to be a tier 2 deck. I don't think it's going to be, I think it's going to be worse than all these decks, but slightly better or right on the same level with these decks. I think it's, without a doubt, the best, stun deck in the game. I guess like Rikka, like honestly Rikka's kind of stun, but not really. Like this is like a floodgate deck, right? It's like gonna be like the best floodgate deck in the game. But there's really no reason to play pure Runick anymore. Just play Runick Spright if you're gonna play it, in my opinion. But pure Runick will still be very, very strong in my opinion. But no one wants to hear about that deck. Moving on to Salamangreat. I think Salad's right here with that Ignister. I might be completely off my rocker saying this, but I think it is. I think it's really good. I think the ability to play Circular and Gazelle is insane. Gazelle is such a good card. Gazelle is the original Circular. And like that does not, like Circular is insane. Like we all acknowledge how good of a card Circular is, but we should also all acknowledge how good of a card Gazelle is. It's not as good as Circular, but it's still very, very good. And it's unlimited now. Gazelle is at 3. And nobody's playing it. When people do play it, it wins tournaments. It won a tournament. And no one's playing it. Granted, that was also a best of 1 tournament. So that's important to note. I should just put that out there. It was a best of 1 tournament, so it doesn't really count. Maybe not. But shout out to this guy for winning it anyways. But this deck is so good. And it's underrated, underused, and I think it's really, really good. But, granted, with Spright coming out, like, who's actually going to play this? So, whatever. Moving on to Shaddolls. I think Shaddolls kind of suck, but are also kind of cool at the same time. I don't really know where to put this, It's a 60 card deck. It got super nerfed by grass getting hit. I mean, if you're an Eastern player, and I mean Eastern as in like an Asian player, you're insane with this deck, and you're just cracked. But if you're like me, and am stupid, and don't know how to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Apparently, this deck sucks. No, I'm just kidding. But in all seriousness, this deck is very popular in Asian, Chinese, Japanese tournaments, but it doesn't really see any play in like American tournaments or, EU tournaments for whatever reason. I don't know exactly why that is, but for that reason, I don't know where to rank a deck like this, because if it sees success in certain places, but not in other ones, I don't know what to do with that material. So all in all, I think this comes out to about a rogue deck, but I think it could potentially be like a tier 3 deck if more people played it, because it does have a lot going for it. It's almost impossible to stop this deck, if it opens anything, really. It's really hard to interact with the deck like this because it has so many effects. But, we'll see as time goes on. Striker. This is going to be like Striker or Striker Runick. Either one, like honestly, like you can... They're very different, but I'm going to lump them together for this. Like whatever version you want to play. I think it's top of tier 3. I think it's really solid. I don't think it gets enough credit. I do think it's better than like Pendulum Magicians and this other stuff, but I don't think it's as good as like this stuff. This could be a little bit lower on the list, but I think this is about right for it. It's got a lot going for it. It's almost completely unlimited now. Having the ability like, oh no, I shouldn't say that. We still only have 1 Kagari and 2 Engage, which kind of sucks. I wish we had 3 Kagari and 1 Engage like TCG does, but you can only hope. Actually, I don't wish that because I don't like playing against this deck. What am I saying? But Linkage makes it. Linkage is a very good addition to the deck. It's just got a lot going for it, right? It's pretty cool. It's got nice grind potential, but it's just not as good as anything else above it. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Moving on to everybody's favorite. I'll talk about that in a second, actually. We'll talk about this last. I'm going to talk about Spyral next. I think Spyral's right here. With Illusion of Chaos, I think Spyral is clearly one of the best decks in the game. I don't know if it's as good as Despia, Sword Soul, Mathmech, or Rikka. I'm not convinced. The reason I'm not convinced is because it hasn't proven anything yet. The deck in its current form doesn't do anything. It doesn't have success. It has success with like 2 people in the format. Like 2 people do good with this deck. That's it. Nobody else sees success with this deck. And adding a little bit of consistency to this deck is definitely going to make it more well-rounded, more well-rounded without a doubt. But is it really going to bridge that gap between it being a very niche deck and being a top-tier deck? I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt and say, yes, it's a tier 2 deck. But I really need to see this succeed before I can move it up into the same category as like Mathmech, Despia, stuff like that. Whereas with Rikka, I have no doubt this deck is going to be like insane because we've seen it. We saw it win a YCS, we saw it win a YCS or Euros or whatever it was. No, it's not the same format, but we've seen it in a format similar to this deck be hyper successful. We've not seen the same thing with Spyral in any format, except when it was like tier 0, right? But that was forever ago. It's a different game now. So I think it's really important to note that this deck, there's an asterisk here. And if it can perform well, it can cement itself as one of the top decks in the game. But if more people don't start playing it, it's not going to actually get that spot. But anyways, moving on to the next deck, Sword Soul. Everybody's favorite Sword Soul. This deck's still great, it doesn't really change, it just gets slightly worse because Spright is better, right? But Protos is still insane. Protos called Dark against Spright is kind of cracked. Pretty much all Spright is dark. Just put that out there. Let's look at this really quickly. Not zombie Spright, that's not a thing. Look at this. Dark, dark, fire, dark, dark, fire, fire, fire. Not even in the game yet. So half this stuff is dark. Right? That's pretty big, right? You're turning off access to half the deck. Half the deck's main deck. So, Protoss goes crazy still. Never fails to go crazy. I don't think anything changed. I still think Sword Soul's better than Mathmech, and Mathmech's slightly better than Despia, but we'll see. Next one is Tri-Sprite. I think it's right here with Spyral. Unproven. This deck is more proven than Spyral, without a doubt more proven than Spyral, because it actually sees success in the current OCG meta, and we have really good basis for building this deck. Also, another thing with Spyral, this deck is still inconsistent as crap. It still plays a lot of bricks. Just because you have Magician of Souls now in Illusion of Chaos does not mean this deck does not still play a lot of bricks, so it's important to note. But I do think the deck's good. But Tri-Sprite, talking about that. This deck's got a really high ceiling. It's got the highest ceiling. Well, no. Adamancipator Sprite's got a higher ceiling than Tri-Brigade Sprite. But of like the really good, proven versions of Spright, this deck's got the highest ceiling, in my opinion. It can do more than Runick, Pure, Live Twin, but it also comes at a greater cost, right? It's so much more, you know, it's a glass cannon. It's more of a glass cannon strategy than any of the other ones, which is why I don't think it's as good, but I think it's got a lot of potential, and I think we are going to see people playing it a lot. I'm definitely going to be testing it. I think it's a really cool deck. Our ban list is almost exactly the same as OCG when it comes to Tri-Brigade, so like we have really good basis like for how to build this deck, given the current format, which is nice, so that you don't need to do a lot of testing there. Of course, you will need a test, but there are really good outlines, good frameworks for how to build a deck like this. So I think it will be really strong, but I don't know how strong. Finally, last but certainly not least, the best deck in Master Duel, Runick Spright. I think this is an inevitability. I don't think there's any way around Runick Spright being the best deck. The only way I see this deck really potentially falling from that pedestal is if you're losing coin flips very consistently and you don't draw board breakers. Because this deck does need to play some form of board breakers, which is kind of unfortunate. I haven't fully mapped out a good list for this yet. I'm really struggling with it. It's a very difficult deck to build because you want to play Max C, you want to play Ash Blossom to stop Max C, you want to play Called Buys, you want to play Crossouts, or Cross Out. You also want to play Swap Frogs because you want to be able to search Max C. That's still really good even in a deck like this. But the engine is massive. The Spright engine is massive, the Runick engine's massive, and it doesn't leave a lot of flexibility for deck building. You also want to play Hyperia. You also want to play Cap Show. You want to play these cards that allow you to like regenerate resources, draw cards during yours and your opponent's turn. Despite all the issues that I just outlined, and you need to play board breakers too, that's important, because this deck loses really hard to like established boards. It doesn't play very well into them. Despite all of that, I think this deck's flexibility, this deck's versatility, and how many options it has for deck building, for board breaking, is second to none. It's almost the complete package. And the only reason it's not considered the complete package in my mind is just because how difficult it is to actually construct that package in the proper way. But with all that being said, this is my tier list for the February 14th ban list and first anniversary celebration pack. Let me know in the comment section below what I got right, what I got wrong, what decks I left off this list, what you'd like to see in future videos, so on and so forth. And yeah, also let me know if you're excited for this. Like, I'm super excited to play for Spright without tier. I think it's going to be a little oppressive, but I am very excited for to get some new blood in the arena. Sorry about that. I hope you didn't hear that. Just smacked my computer. But yeah, let me know in the comment section below your thoughts. Yeah, but without further ado, have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.